The doors to the great hall opened with a soft hiss. Jake Morris stepped inside and immediately felt every eye turn toward him. The hall was enormous, bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. The ceiling stretched so high above that he could barely see it. Lights floated in the air without any visible support, casting a warm glow over everything. Hundreds of aliens filled the massive space. They sat in curved rows that rose up like a theater. Some were tall and thin, like walking sticks. Others were short and covered in fur or scales. A few didn't even look like they had solid bodies at all. They shimmered and changed shape as he watched. Jake heard the first laugh when he was only 3 steps into the hall. It came from somewhere to his left, a high-pitched sound that echoed off the walls. Then another laugh joined it, and another. Within seconds, the whole hall buzzed with the sound of amusement. He knew why they were laughing. His armor looked terrible. The white paint that once covered it had burned away in most places, leaving bare metal showing through. The right shoulder plate hung at an odd angle, held in place by what looked like ordinary wire. Scorch marks covered the chest piece in black streaks. The left arm had been patched with metal that didn't even match the original color. Someone had welded it on in rough, uneven lines. Jake kept walking. His boots made heavy sounds on the polished floor. Each step took effort. The armor's servo motors, the tiny engines that were supposed to help him move, were grinding and wheezing. They sounded like an old car that was about to break down. One of them, in his left knee, made a sharp clicking noise every time he took a step. The helmet's display kept flickering. Numbers and readouts appeared and disappeared in front of his eyes. Sometimes the whole display would go dark for a second or two before coming back on. Jake had gotten used to it over the past few weeks. He didn't need the computer to tell him what his body already knew. A tall alien stood up in the front row. Its body looked like it was made of blue metal, with long arms that ended in sharp points instead of hands. When it spoke, its voice boomed through the hall. "Is this truly what Earth sends to our gathering?" The creature's words dripped with contempt. "A warrior who cannot even maintain his equipment?" More laughter filled the hall. Jake saw a group of aliens that looked like giant insects. Their shells were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the floating lights. They clicked their mandibles together in what he guessed was their version of laughing. Next to them, a group of smaller aliens, with pale skin and large eyes, whispered to each other behind their hands. Jake reached his assigned spot and stopped. A small platform waited for him, marked with a holographic symbol that matched the one on his damaged chest plate. He stepped onto it and stood at attention, just like he had been trained to do back on Earth. From the observation deck high above, Captain Lisa Hayes watched him. She was too far away for Jake to see her face clearly, but he knew she was worried. She had tried to get him new armor before this ceremony. She had filled out the request forms. She had called in favors. But there simply wasn't time. The ceremony was today, and Jake had arrived on the station only 2 hours ago. Lisa knew the truth about the armor. She knew what every scratch and dent represented. But the aliens in the hall didn't know. They only saw what looked like a poorly equipped soldier from a backward planet. A being that looked like it was made of living crystal floated to the center of the hall. This was Counselor Vex, the master of ceremonies. His body caught the light and split it into rainbows that danced across the walls. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome, warriors of the known galaxy," Vex said. His words were translated into Jake's language by the small device in his ear. "You have gathered here to demonstrate the might of your peoples, to show the strength of your technology, and the courage of your hearts." Vex gestured toward the rows of aliens. "Each of you represents the finest your world has to offer, the strongest armor, the most advanced weapons, the greatest training your civilizations can provide." His gaze swept across the room and landed on Jake. For a moment, Jake thought he saw something in those crystalline eyes. Not mockery like the others. Something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or was it pity? We begin with the traditional displays, Vex continued. Each warrior will demonstrate the capabilities of their equipment. We shall see shields that can turn aside the fury of stars, armor that can withstand the void of space. A large alien covered in thick gray skin stood up. It wore armor that looked brand new, with not a single scratch on its surface. The metal was a deep red color, and seemed to pulse with inner light. When it moved, the armor moved with it smoothly, like a second skin. "I am Commander Drax of the Krellian Empire," the alien announced. Its voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "My armor has been forged in the heart of a dying star. It has never failed. It has never faltered. It is perfection." Drax looked directly at Jake as he said this. His eyes, small and yellow, held nothing but contempt. Several other Krellian warriors behind him clicked their claws together in approval. A smaller alien with pale blue skin and delicate features stood next. She wore armor that looked like it was made of glass or crystal. It was beautiful, catching the light and making her seem to glow. "I am Ambassador Lyra of the Venethi Collective," she said in a soft voice. "Our armor is grown, not built. It adapts to any threat. It learns from every battle. It is alive, as we are alive." She glanced at Jake, and he saw her shake her head slightly. It was a small gesture, but the meaning was clear. She felt sorry for him. In her eyes, he was already defeated. One by one, the other warriors introduced themselves. Each one had armor that looked like it had just been made. Shining, perfect, powerful. And each one looked at Jake with some combination of amusement or pity or disgust. Jake stood silent through it all. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He simply waited. His face showed nothing. Years of military training had taught him how to keep his emotions hidden. But inside, he was thinking about New Portland, about the colonists, about the children he had protected. The damaged armor pressed against his body in dozens of places where it no longer fit quite right. The weight of it, without the servo motors working properly, made his shoulders ache. But he had carried this weight for weeks now. He could carry it a little longer. And finally, Vex said, turning to Jake, "We have Commander Jake Morris of Earth. Welcome to the Galactic Council. Commander, will you tell us about your armor?" ATM. The hall fell quiet. Everyone waited to hear what the human would say. How would he explain showing up to such an important ceremony, looking like he had just crawled out of a garbage heap? Jake took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "My armor has seen combat," he said simply. "It has done its job. That was all. No grand speeches, no excuses, just those 2 short sentences." The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter started again, louder than before. Counselor Vex raised one crystalline hand, and the laughter slowly died down. The floating lights in the hall dimmed slightly, and a large circular area in the center of the floor began to glow. This was the demonstration arena. "We shall begin the trials," Vex announced. "First, the test of strength. Each warrior will show us what their armor can withstand." Commander Drax stepped forward first. His red armor gleamed as he walked to the center of the glowing circle. A holographic display appeared in the air above him, showing readings and measurements that Jake didn't fully understand. "Observe," Drax said, his rough voice filled with pride. A small drone floated down from the ceiling. It was about the size of a basketball and hummed as it moved through the air. Without warning, it fired a beam of bright blue energy directly at Drax's chest. The beam was so intense that Jake had to look away for a moment. When he looked back, Drax stood unchanged. His armor didn't have a single mark on it. The holographic display showed that the beam had carried enough energy to melt through 6 inches of solid steel. But Drax's armor had absorbed it all, without even getting warm. The Krellian warriors in the audience clicked their claws together in approval. Drax bowed slightly and returned to his platform, shooting Jake a look that clearly said, "Let's see your broken armor do that." Ambassador Lyra went next. Her crystal-like armor shimmered as she took her place in the circle. The same drone appeared. But this time it fired 3 different types of weapons at once. Energy beams, small metal projectiles, and some kind of acid that hissed and steamed when it hit. Lyra's armor responded to each threat differently. Where the energy hit, the armor became reflective, bouncing the beam away. Where the projectile struck, the armor became soft, absorbing the impact like a pillow. Where the acid landed, the armor simply dissolved that section and grew new material to replace it within seconds. Adaptive defense, Lyra explained, her soft voice somehow carrying through the whole hall. My armor thinks. It responds. It protects. The audience made sounds of approval in a dozen different languages. Jake watched carefully. The technology was impressive, far beyond anything Earth had developed. But he noticed something. Both Drax and Lyra had demonstrated their armor in controlled conditions. Against threats they expected. Against weapons that were designed to make them look good. Several more warriors took their turns. Each demonstration was more elaborate than the last. One alien showed armor that could become invisible. Another demonstrated a suit that could survive being submerged in lava. A third warrior showed how their armor could split apart and fight as separate pieces, defending its wearer from multiple directions at once. Finally, it was Jake's turn. He stepped into the circle slowly. Each movement made his armor creak and groan. The clicking in his left knee seemed louder now, echoing in the quiet hall. The demonstration drone descended. But before it could fire, Counselor Vex held up a hand. Commander Morris, Vex said, and Jake thought he heard something new in the alien's voice. Not mockery, more like genuine curiosity. Compromised. Perhaps it would be unwise to subject it to further stress. You may withdraw from this portion of the trial without dishonor. The offer was polite. But Jake understood what it really meant. Vex was giving him an easy way out. A chance to save face before his armor failed completely in front of everyone. Thank you, Counselor, Jake replied. But I'd like to proceed. Vex studied him for a long moment, then nodded. As you wish. The drone activated. It fired the same blue energy beam that it had used on Drax. The beam hit Jake square in the chest. His armor absorbed most of it, but heat bled through in several places where the damaged plates didn't seal properly anymore. Jake felt it like someone pressing hot coins against his skin. He didn't move, didn't flinch. The holographic display showed that his armor had only blocked about 60% of the beam's energy. The rest had passed right through. By the standards of this competition, his armor had failed the test. More whispers spread through the crowd. Jake heard the word primitive in several different languages. His translator device picked them all up, but then something happened that made the whispers stop. The drone fired again, this time from a different angle. Then again. And again. It circled Jake, hitting him from every direction. Each shot made his armor smoke and sizzle. The smell of burning metal filled the air. Jake stood perfectly still through it all. After the 12th shot, Vex called for the drone to stop. Sufficient, the counselor said. We have seen enough. But what exactly had they seen? To most of the aliens in the hall, they had witnessed a piece of inferior equipment failing under stress, but a few of them, the ones who had actually fought in real battles, noticed something else. They noticed that Jake hadn't moved. Not even a little. Despite the heat, despite the pain that must have come from the energy bleeding through his damaged armor, he had simply stood there and taken it. Captain Lisa Hayes, watching from above, closed her eyes. She knew what that kind of stillness meant. It meant Jake had endured worse. Much worse. The trials continued with tests of mobility. Warriors ran obstacle courses that appeared in the air, created by holographic technology. They leaped over barriers taller than houses. They dodged through narrow passages at incredible speeds. Their armor made them faster, stronger, more agile than any unaugmented being could ever be. When Jake's turn came, he walked the course instead of running. His damaged servo motors couldn't support running anymore. Where others jumped, he climbed. Where others dodged, he simply pushed through, letting his armor take hits from the holographic barriers. It took him 3 times longer than anyone else to finish the course. By the end, smoke was rising from several joints in his armor. The grinding sounds had gotten worse. But he finished. The crowd didn't laugh anymore. Now they just looked confused. Why would Earth send someone like this? Why would a warrior show up to an important ceremony with equipment that barely functioned? It didn't make sense. During a brief break, a young woman approached Jake. She was human, one of the few others from Earth at the ceremony. Her name was Kate Sullivan, and she worked as a diplomatic assistant. "Commander Morris," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Sir, why are you doing this? Why didn't you get new armor? You're making us look bad in front of the entire galaxy." Jake took the water bottle she offered and drank slowly. When he finished, he looked at her with tired eyes. "Kate," he said quietly, "just watch. You'll understand soon." "Understand what?" she demanded. "That we can't even maintain our equipment properly? That we're not ready to be here?" Jake didn't answer. He just handed back the water bottle and returned to his platform. Counselor Vex floated back to the center of the hall. The floating lights brightened again. "We now move to the final trial," Vex announced. "The test of purpose. Each warrior will demonstrate not just what their armor can do, but what it has done. Show us your victories. Show us how your equipment has served you in actual combat." This was different from the earlier tests. This wasn't about controlled demonstrations. This was about real battles, real survival. Commander Drax went first again. Holographic displays showed footage from his armor's recording systems. The images showed him leading Krellian troops against some kind of rebellion. His armor's shields turned aside, weapons fire. His strength allowed him to tear through barricades. In one dramatic moment, a small ship's cannon fired directly at him, and his armor's defensive systems protected him completely. The audience made appreciative sounds. It was an impressive display of combat capability. Ambassador Lyra showed her recordings next. Her battle had been different. Fought in the toxic atmosphere of a hostile world. The footage showed her armor adapting to chemicals that dissolved metal, growing new layers faster than the environment could destroy them. She had rescued a research team from a collapsing facility while the very air tried to eat through her protection. One by one, the warriors showed their combat records. Battles won. Enemies defeated. Lives saved. Each recording was carefully edited to show the warrior and their armor in the best possible light. Then, it was Jake's turn. He stepped into the center of the circle, but he didn't activate any holographic displays. He didn't show any recordings. Instead, he just stood there, looking out at the assembled aliens. 3 weeks ago, Jake began, his voice quiet but clear. A colony called New Portland came under attack. The hall grew silent. This wasn't what they expected. Where were the dramatic battle recordings? Where were the displays of superior technology? Jake continued. New Portland is a small settlement on the edge of explored space. 200 people live there. 73 of them are children. Jake stood in the center of the circle, and every eye in the hall watched him. The silence was complete. Even the aliens who had laughed the loudest now sat perfectly still, waiting to hear what the human would say. "The raiders came at night," Jake said. His voice was steady, but those who listened carefully could hear something underneath it, something hard and cold. They wanted the colony's supplies. Food, medicine, fuel cells. They didn't care that people lived there. They didn't care about the children. He paused, and in that pause, Captain Lisa Hayes felt her throat tighten. "My team was 6 people," Jake continued. "We were the closest responders. By the time we arrived, the raiders had already surrounded the main settlement. They had numbers. They had heavy weapons. They had orbital support from their ships. Ambassador Lyra leaned forward in her seat. This didn't sound like the kind of battle that ended well. This sounded like the kind of situation where you retreated and called for backup. We couldn't wait for reinforcements, Jake said, as if he had heard her thoughts. The raiders were going to breach the settlement's walls within hours, so we set up a defensive position between them and the colonists. 6 of us. Against more than 100 raiders, Commander Drax made a sound that might have been disbelief. 6 against 100? That wasn't bravery. That was suicide. Jake's hand moved to his chest plate, fingers tracing one of the many scorch marks. This mark here. This was from the first hour. A plasma rifle. Shot. My armor's shields took most of it, but the heat still got through. It felt like someone pressed a hot iron against my ribs. He moved his hand to his right shoulder, where the plate hung at an odd angle. Hour 2. A rocket hit near our position. Shrapnel tore through the shield generator. After that, we had no shields. Just the armor plates themselves. The hall remained silent. Jake wasn't showing them recordings or holographic displays. He was showing them something more personal. He was showing them his armor itself, and each mark on it was part of the story. Hour 3. We lost Stevens. Jake's voice didn't change, but somehow it became heavier. A sniper round. It went right through his helmet. He was 19 years old. It was his first deployment. Kate Sullivan, standing at the edge of the hall, felt tears start to form in her eyes. She hadn't known. Nobody had told her the details. Hour 4. We lost Garcia. Hour 5. We lost Chen. Jake touched another mark on his armor. With each name. The raiders kept coming. They thought if they just threw enough bodies at us, we would break. They were wrong. He looked up at the assembled aliens. His eyes moved from face to face, meeting their gazes. Hour 6. My armor's power core started showing warning signs. Too much stress. Too much damage. The computer told me I had maybe 3 more hours of full power. Counselor Vex's crystalline body seemed to dim slightly. 3 hours of power. And Jake had said the battle lasted how long? Hour 7. We lost Monroe. Hour 8. We lost Davis. Jake's hand dropped to his side. That left just me and Lieutenant Peterson. 2 people. Still more than 80 raiders, and the reinforcements were still 8 hours away. The clicking of Krellian claws had stopped. The whispers of the Venethi had ceased. Every being in the hall was focused completely on the human in damaged armor. Peterson's armor failed first. Hour 9. His power core died, and suddenly he was carrying 240 pounds of dead weight. He couldn't move, couldn't fight. I dragged him to cover and told him to stay down. Jake's hand touched the left arm of his armor, where the mismatched metal had been welded on. A raider shot hit my arm assembly, destroyed the servo motors, shorted out half the systems. I had to cut the arm plate off entirely and replace it with scrap metal I found in the settlement. I did it one-handed, while still firing with my other hand. Ambassador Lyra's eyes widened. He had performed field repairs in the middle of combat? While under fire? Hour 9 was when my power core died too. Jake said quietly. I felt it happen. 1 second, the armor was helping me move. The next second, it was just weight. 240 pounds of metal wrapped around my body. No servo motors. No computer assistance. No strength enhancement. Just me and a very heavy suit of armor that I couldn't take off because it was the only thing keeping me alive. The implications of this hit the audience like a physical blow. Some of them understood immediately. Others took a few seconds longer. But eventually, they all realized what Jake was saying. He had fought for 7 more hours in armor that had no power. Hour 10, Jake continued, his voice never changing. The raiders tried a full assault. They thought with only 1 person left fighting, they could overwhelm the position. I held the main entrance to the settlement. Just me and my rifle. in armor that weighed as much as a small person. Armor that I had to move with pure muscle strength. He touched the chest plate again, where dozens of small dents marked the surface. Every round that hit me, I felt it. The armor still stopped the bullets. But without the shock absorption systems working, every impact was like getting hit with a hammer. Commander Drax stood up slowly. His species respected strength above all else. And what the human was describing, it shouldn't be possible. Moving in unpowered armor required strength that no normal being possessed. Hour 11. Raiders got behind our position. I had to leave the entrance and protect Peterson. He was still alive, still conscious, but he couldn't defend himself. So I stood over him, fought from there. Jake's breathing was steady, but those watching could see his hands had formed into fists. The memory was affecting him, even if his voice didn't show it. Hours 12 through 14. They tried everything. Grenades, rockets. They even brought up a vehicle-mounted weapon that should have torn through my armor like paper. But armor that's already broken doesn't break the same way twice. The systems were dead, but the plates themselves were solid. They held. He looked down at his armor, at all the damage, all the repairs, all the marks that the aliens had laughed at. Hour 15. I heard crying from inside the settlement. A child. Maybe 5 years old. She was scared. She wanted her mother. The raiders heard it too. They started focusing their fire on that section of the wall, trying to break through. Kate Sullivan had her hand over her mouth now, trying not to make any sound. I couldn't let them through, Jake said simply. So I moved to that section, put myself between the raiders and that wall, between them and that little girl. And I stood there, in 240 pounds of unpowered armor. And I didn't move. The silence in the hall was so complete that when Jake's armor made its clicking sound, everyone heard it clearly. Hour 16. The reinforcements finally arrived. I heard their ships coming in. Heard the raiders starting to scatter. It was over. Jake raised his head and looked directly at Counselor Vex. When the rescue team reached my position, they found me still standing, still armed. My armor had locked up in my final defensive posture. My muscles had cramped so badly that I couldn't move even after the power came back on. They had to cut me out of the armor. He touched the chest plate one final time. This armor kept me alive for 16 hours. It stopped bullets, and plasma, and shrapnel, and explosions. And when its power died, I kept it alive. I moved it with my own strength. I turned it from a powered combat suit into a metal shell, and I used that shell to protect 200 people who had no one else. Jake looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of those who had laughed at him. You asked what my armor can do. It can survive. It can endure. And when everything else fails, it can become a shield that a human can carry through sheer will alone. He stepped back from the center of the circle. The story was finished. But he wasn't done. Not quite yet. Every mark on this armor tells part of that story, Jake said. Every dent, every scorch mark, every crude repair. This isn't damaged equipment. This is proof. Proof of what? The aliens in the hall were starting to understand, but they needed to see more. They needed to understand what it meant to be human, what it meant to refuse to quit. Jake reached up to his helmet. His fingers found the seal release, and there was a soft hiss as the pressurized locks disengaged. The sound seemed loud in the silent hall. Every alien leaned forward slightly, curious to see the face of the human who had told such an impossible story. The helmet came off slowly. Jake's face was revealed to the assembly for the first time. Several aliens made sounds of surprise or concern. His face was thin, thinner than it should be. All, this one. Dark circles sat under his eyes like bruises. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, still pink and fresh. His hair, what little showed beneath where the helmet had been, was streaked with gray at the temples. He looked older than his file said he was, but it was his eyes that caught their attention. They were calm, steady. The eyes of someone who had seen something terrible and survived it. Jake set the helmet down carefully on the floor beside him. Then he reached for the chest plate. This piece was more complicated. He had to release several catches and disconnect some cables that still had minimal power running through them. The armor's computer gave a sad little beep as he disconnected the main data line. The chest plate came away with a sound like tearing metal. Several of the welds that held the emergency repairs in place chose that moment to give way completely. Small pieces of metal clattered to the floor. Jake didn't seem to notice. He just kept working, removing the armor piece by piece. Underneath the chest plate, his shirt was stained with old sweat and newer blood. Bandages wrapped around his ribs, visible through tears in the fabric. The bandages were clean, which meant someone had changed them recently, but there were spots where red was seeping through. Ambassador Lyra stood up from her seat. Her species were healers as well as warriors, and she recognized signs of serious injury. "Commander Morris," she called out, her soft voice carrying through the hall. "You are wounded. You should stop. You need medical attention." Jake looked up at her and gave a small smile. It wasn't a happy smile. More like the kind of smile someone gives when they've heard a joke that isn't very funny. "I know," he said simply. Then he continued removing the armor. The right arm came off next. As Jake pulled it away, they could all see his actual arm underneath. From elbow to wrist, it was covered in burn scars. The skin was still healing, still pink and angry looking. When he moved his fingers, some of the aliens winced. It clearly hurt, but Jake's face showed nothing. "Hour 7, Jake said quietly, looking at the scarred arm. Plasma grenade went off too close. The armor's heat shielding failed. I could smell my own skin burning, but I couldn't stop fighting. So I wrapped it in emergency medical gel and kept going." He set the right arm piece down and moved to the left arm. The mismatched metal that had been welded on looked even worse up close. The welds were rough and uneven, clearly done in a hurry by someone who wasn't a professional. "I did this repair myself," Jake said. Hour 9. One-handed. While the raiders were regrouping for another assault. The metal came from a damaged water tank in the settlement. It's not rated for combat. It's not even the right kind of alloy, but it stopped bullets well enough. The left arm piece came away, and underneath it, his arm looked better than the right one. But there was a long cut running down from shoulder to elbow, held together with medical adhesive. The edges of the wound were still pink. Next came the leg pieces. The right leg came off easily enough, though Jake had to sit down on the floor to remove it properly. His actual leg underneath looked bruised, but otherwise intact. The left leg was a different story. When the left leg armor came away, the gasps from the audience were audible. Jake's leg was held together by an external medical brace, the kind of brace that was supposed to be a temporary emergency measure, not something you wore for weeks. The brace ran from his hip to his ankle, with metal struts and tension cables keeping everything aligned. "Hour 12, Jake said, his voice still calm. "A piece of debris from an explosion hit my leg, broke the femur in 3 places. The armor's medical system injected emergency bone stabilizer and deployed the brace. Then it locked the armor's leg into a rigid position to support my weight." He touched the brace gently. "I couldn't bend this leg after that. Couldn't kneel. Couldn't crouch. I had to stand upright, or not at all. So I stood." Commander Drax had moved closer without realizing it. His species understood pain. They respected warriors who could endure it. But this was beyond anything in their experience. A broken leg, held together by a temporary brace, for 16 hours of combat? Jake wasn't finished. He reached behind himself and began working on the backplate. This was the hardest piece to remove because it held the armor's main power core and most of the major systems. He had to twist and bend in ways that clearly hurt, but eventually, the catches released. The backplate came away, and Jake held it up for everyone to see. Right in the center, where the power core should have been glowing with stored energy, there was nothing, just a dead, dark cylinder that looked like it had been through a fire. "This is what a completely drained power core looks like," Jake said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Every combat suit has safety limits. When the power core gets to 20%, it starts warning you to retreat. At 10%, it starts shutting down non-essential systems. At 5%, it's supposed to go into emergency power-saving mode and call for extraction." He turned the power core so everyone could see the readout panel. Even from a distance, the aliens could see that the display was completely dark. Not a single light. Not a single flicker of power. "This core went to 0, Jake said. "Past 0, actually. The emergency reserves are drained too. I pushed it beyond every safety limit, beyond every specification, until there was nothing left." He set the backplate down carefully. Now he stood in the center of the hall, wearing only his undersuit and the medical braces. His body told the story that his words had described. Burns, cuts, bruises that covered most of his visible skin in patterns of yellow and purple and green. But he still wasn't done. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small data chip. He held it up so everyone could see. "My armor recorded everything," Jake said. "Every second of those 16 hours, I could show you the recordings. I could prove every word I've said. But I'm not going to do that." Confusion rippled through the audience. Why wouldn't he show proof? After such an incredible story, why not provide evidence? Jake looked at the data chip for a long moment. "Because this isn't about proving anything. This is about understanding something. He put the chip away and looked out at the assembled aliens. "You all showed recordings of your greatest victories. Perfect moments where your armor made you look invincible, where everything worked exactly as it was supposed to, where you looked like heroes." His voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense. "But that's not what real combat looks like. Real combat is messy. Equipment fails. People die. Nothing goes according to plan. And you have to keep fighting anyway." He gestured at his battered body. "This is what it really looks like. This is what happens when a warrior pushes beyond the limits. When they refuse to quit even when every logical calculation says they should." Captain Lisa Hayes, watching from above, wiped tears from her eyes. She had tried to prepare the aliens for this, but there was no way to prepare them. They had to see it. They had to understand. Jake picked up the power core again. "Human armor isn't designed to make us superhuman. It's designed to enhance what we already are. And sometimes, the human is enough." He looked at Commander Drax. "Your armor can withstand a ship's cannon. That's impressive. But can you fight for 7 hours without any power at all? Can you move 240 pounds of dead weight through pure muscle strength while people shoot at you?" He turned to Ambassador Lyra. "Your armor adapts to any threat. That's remarkable. But what happens when the adaptation system fails? What do you do when your armor stops thinking for you and you have to think for yourself?" The questions weren't accusations. They were genuine questions. And the aliens didn't have answers. Jake carefully gathered his armor pieces. Each one looked even worse now that it was separated from the others. Individually, each piece looked like it should have been thrown away weeks ago. Together, they had kept a man alive through the impossible. The silence in the hall stretched on. Jake stood there in his undersuit, surrounded by pieces of his broken armor, and waited. He had said what he needed to say. Now it was up to the aliens to decide what it meant. Commander Drax was the first to move. The massive Krellian stood up from his seat and stepped down from the observation rows. His footsteps were heavy, each one echoing through the quiet hall. He walked across the polished floor until he stood directly in front of Jake. For a long moment, Drax just looked at the human. His yellow eyes studied Jake's scarred face, his burned arms, his braced leg. Then, slowly, deliberately, Drax crossed both arms over his chest and bowed his head. It was a gesture of deep respect in Krellian culture, reserved only for warriors who had proven themselves beyond any doubt. "I laughed at you," Drax said, his rough voice carrying through the hall. "I saw broken armor, and thought it meant a broken warrior. I was wrong. You are not broken. You are proven." He straightened up and looked Jake in the eye. "In my culture, we say that armor is only as strong as the warrior who wears it. I see now that I had this backwards. The warrior is only as strong as their will to fight. Your armor failed, but you did not. That is true strength." Drax placed one clawed hand over his heart, another gesture of respect. "I apologize for my mockery, Commander Jake Morris of Earth. You have my respect. You have earned it." Before Jake could respond, Ambassador Lyra stood as well. She moved with grace down to the floor, her crystal armor catching the light as she walked. When she reached Jake, tears were running down her pale blue face. "I pitied you," she said softly. "I thought you were a victim of poor equipment, poor planning. I see now that I understood nothing." She looked at the pieces of armor scattered around Jake's feet. "This armor did not fail you. It gave you everything it had, and when it had nothing left to give, you carried it. You and this armor were partners in survival." She reached out and gently touched one of the burn scars on Jake's arm. "My people are healers. We understand pain, but we have never understood this kind of endurance, this kind of refusal to surrender. You have taught us something today." One by one, other aliens began to stand. They came down from the observation rows and approached Jake. Each one offered their own form of respect. Some bowed. Some made gestures with their hands or limbs. Some simply stood in silence, acknowledging what they had witnessed. Kate Sullivan pushed through the crowd. When she reached Jake, she looked at him with new eyes, eyes that finally understood. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was angry that you made us look bad. But you didn't make us look bad. You showed them who we really are." Jake gave her a tired smile. "It's okay, Kate. You didn't know. Most people don't understand until they see it." Captain Lisa Hayes came down from the observation deck. She moved quickly, almost running. When she reached Jake, she didn't salute or stand on ceremony. She just put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently, careful to avoid his injuries. "You should be in a hospital," she said quietly. "I will be soon," Jake replied. "But I needed to be here first. They needed to see." "They saw," Lisa said. "The whole galaxy saw." Counselor Vex floated down to the center of the hall. His crystalline body seemed brighter than before, pulsing with inner light. When he spoke, his voice filled every corner of the vast space. "I have presided over this ceremony for 73 cycles," Vex said. "I have seen warriors from 1,000 worlds. I have witnessed demonstrations of technology that borders on magic. I have heard tales of great victories and terrible defeats, but I have never seen anything like this." He looked at Jake with what might have been wonder. "Commander Morris, you have changed the nature of this gathering. We came here to show off our best equipment, our most advanced technology. We came here to prove that our armor makes us superior. But you have shown us something more important." Vex gestured at the assembled aliens. "You have shown us that the warrior matters more than the weapon. That will matters more than technology. That sometimes the greatest strength is the strength to keep going when everything else has failed." The counselor's body dimmed slightly, a sign of serious thought in his species. "We have been measuring the wrong things. We have been asking, what can your armor do? When we should have been asking, what can you do when your armor fails? Because armor will fail, technology will break, equipment will malfunction. But the warrior inside must endure." He turned to face the crowd. "I propose that we change this ceremony. Starting today, we will no longer only celebrate the warriors with the best technology. We will also honor those who have pushed beyond their limits. those who have endured the impossible. Those who have refused to break even when everything around them was breaking. The hall erupted in sounds of agreement. Clicks and whistles and hums and chirps in a dozen different languages, all saying the same thing. Yes, this was right. This was how it should be. Vex turned back to Jake. Commander Jake Morris of Earth, you are the first recipient of this new honor. Your armor will be placed in the Hall of Heroes, not as a relic of victory, but as a reminder that the greatest battles are not won by the strongest armor, but by the strongest will. Jake looked down at his scattered armor pieces. The armor that had kept him alive. The armor that had failed but hadn't quit. The armor that told the story of 16 impossible hours. Thank you, Counselor, Jake said. But I have one request. Speak it, Vex replied. The armor needs to be repaired first. Fully repaired. Then, put on display. Jake's voice was firm. Not because I'm ashamed of how it looks now, but because this armor isn't done yet. Understanding dawned in Vex's crystalline features. You mean to wear it again? After everything it has been through? After all this damage? You will trust your life to it again? Yes, Jake said simply. It saved my life when it had no power left. It protected me when any other armor would have failed completely. Why wouldn't I trust it? We've been through worse together. This statement, more than anything else, drove home the point. The armor wasn't just equipment to Jake. It was a partner, a companion in survival. And just like he wouldn't abandon a wounded comrade, he wouldn't abandon his armor. A small alien with green skin and large eyes stepped forward. Commander Morris, I am Engineer Plix. I would consider it an honor to repair your armor. I will make it stronger than it was before. But I will keep every mark, every scar. They are part of its story now. Jake nodded his thanks. I appreciate that. Engineer Plix. I am pleased. The ceremony continued, but it was different now. The other warriors presented their demonstrations, but there was less showing off, less arrogance. They had all been reminded that armor was just a tool. The true warrior was the being inside. When the official events ended, many aliens approached Jake. They wanted to know more about Earth, about human training, about how humans could endure so much. Jake answered their questions patiently. Though his body was clearly exhausted, Commander Drax asked about the colonists. The people of New Portland. They survived because of you. Do they know what you endured for them? Jake thought about it. Some of them saw parts of it, but most of them were sheltered inside. They know there was a battle. They know people died to protect them. That's enough. It is not enough, Drax rumbled. They should know. The whole galaxy should know. Maybe, Jake said. But that's not why I did it. I didn't fight for recognition, or honor, or glory. I fought because those people needed someone to stand between them and harm. That's what we do. That's what it means to be a warrior. Ambassador Lyra, who had been listening, spoke up. Is that common among humans? This willingness to sacrifice yourself for strangers? Jake smiled. You'd be surprised how common it is. Humans have been doing it for thousands of years. Soldiers who throw themselves on grenades to save their squad. Firefighters who run into burning buildings to save people they've never met. Ordinary people who see someone in trouble and help, even when it puts them at risk. He looked around at all the aliens gathered near him. It's not about the armor. It's not even about training, really. It's about the choice. The choice to stand when you could run. The choice to fight when you could surrender. The choice to endure when you could give up. Kate Sullivan had been taking notes, recording everything for her diplomatic reports. But now she stopped and just listened. This was important. This was the kind of thing that would change how aliens saw humanity. As the evening wore on, Jake's exhaustion became impossible to hide. Captain Lisa Hayes finally insisted that he go to the medical bay. Jake didn't argue. He had done what he came here to do. But before he left, he gathered the pieces of his armor. Even broken and scattered, even being held together by crude repairs, it was his armor. His partner. He wasn't going to leave it behind. Engineer Plix helped him carry the pieces to the medical bay. The small alien was already making plans, muttering to himself about reinforcement techniques and stress distribution. Jake listened and occasionally offered suggestions. By the time they reached the medical bay, they had become friends. The doctors insisted that Jake stay for at least 3 days. His injuries were more serious than he had let on. The broken leg needed proper treatment. The burns needed specialized care. The exhaustion and dehydration needed time to heal. Jake agreed, but only on the condition that his armor stayed in the room with him. The doctors thought it was strange, but they agreed. On the second day, Counselor Vex visited. The crystalline being floated into the medical room and observed Jake for a long moment. "You changed something yesterday," Vex said. "Not just in the ceremony. You changed how the galaxy sees humanity." Jake, lying in the hospital bed with various monitors attached to him, shrugged. "Truth is powerful," Vex replied. "But it is not just the truth of what happened. It is the truth of what humans are. You showed them that humans do not give up. Even when logic says to stop, even when the odds are impossible, humans endure. Most species would call that stubbornness," Jake said with a slight smile. "Most species would be correct," Vex agreed. "But sometimes, stubbornness is exactly what the situation requires." The counselor moved closer to the armor pieces that Engineer Plix had carefully arranged in the corner of the room. "This armor will hang in our Hall of Heroes for 1,000 years. Children from 100 worlds will see it and ask about the warrior who wore it, and they will learn what it truly means to be strong." Jake looked at his armor, seeing it with new eyes. It did look heroic now. In a way, not despite the damage, but because of it. Each mark was a moment when Jake had refused to quit. Each repair was evidence of adaptation under pressure. Each dent was proof of survival. "Counselor," Jake said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you let me continue yesterday? When I first arrived, you could have asked me to leave. You could have said my armor wasn't fit for the ceremony. But you didn't. Why?" Vex's body pulsed with light, the equivalent of a smile. "Because I saw something in your eyes. Something that made me curious. You stood there in broken armor, surrounded by mockery, and you were not ashamed. You were not embarrassed. You were simply waiting. That told me there was more to your story than what we could see." The counselor floated toward the door, preparing to leave. But he paused and looked back at Jake. "Thank you, Commander Morris. Thank you for reminding us what matters." The hall fell silent when you removed your armor, but it was not a silence of shock or pity. It was a silence of understanding. "We finally understood what it means to be a warrior. You taught us that." After Vex left, Jake lay back in his bed and looked at the ceiling. His body hurt. Every part of him ached, but he felt peaceful. The 200 colonists of New Portland were safe. The galaxy now understood a little more about humanity. And his armor, his faithful companion through the impossible, would be repaired and ready for the next time it was needed. Because there would be a next time. There always was. And when that time came, Jake would put on his armor again and do what humans had always done. He would endure.